Welcome back to the Books Brothers podcast, the podcast where longtime friends spread across the country reconnect over the pages of a good book. Each episode, we dive into what we are reading, sharing our thoughts, debate, and enjoy a few laughs along the way. Whether you're a big reader or just enjoy listening to the discussion, join us as we explore insightful topics and connect each week. I'm Garrett.
I'm Steven.
I'm Matt.
I'm Thomas.
And I'm Flez.
We are currently reading through Gates of Fire, an epic novel of the Battle of Thermopylae by Steven Pressfield. This week, we'll be discussing the final installment of the book, Book 8, Thermopylae. In this book, Xiones details the final battle at the Hot Gates, where every Spartan and Thespian perish, save Xiones himself, since he is recounting the entire book. At this point in the book, the Persians are now losing the battle at sea. Xiones' health is failing, but he has strength to tell one last story. How Leonidas chose the 300. We had not learned his methodology for choosing, and the Persians really wanted to know themselves at this point. The scene shifts to Lady Perilea's home, where Leonidas and his wife, the Queen Gorgo, visit her in her grief. Perileia had just learned that both her husband, Olympius, and her son, Alexandros, were selected as 2 of the 300. So that means she'd lose both of them simultaneously. Leonidas shares that he, quote, chose them, the Spartan men, not for their own valor, but for that of their women. When the 300 die and all of Greece look at Sparta, they will look to the women's response. If they are steadfast and embrace the honor of what the battle stood for, then all of Greece will respond accordingly. Xiones then dies. In a twist, Orontes, the Persian captain who was overseeing his capture, his captivity, he ends up paying 3 Greeks in the city that they're in, who are plundering the ransacked city because, again, the Persians are losing the battle. Things are just in mass chaos. The Greeks are taking back the land. And Orontes pays these guys to stop ransacking the city and return Xiones' body to the same convent that Diomede lives in. He pays them handsomely, and they do it. The book ends with the story focusing on the historian who wrote down Xiones' retelling of the entire story, which is this book. The Persians fall, Xerxes retreats, and the historian's station was overrun by Greek helots. Right as the historian was about to be killed, in his desperation, he started yelling out every Spartan name he had learned from Xiones' story. The helots stop from killing him and bring him to a Spartan, Rooster. Rooster corroborated the historian's claim that he knew Xiones, as Xiones' body and his ashes indeed were returned to Lake Daemon by a priestess of the temple. So I presume that is Diomede herself. The last paragraphs detail how after the war, Spartan women were taken to the battlefield afterwards to gather any remains of the fallen Spartans and pay tribute. At the battlefield, an epitaph was engraved in stone that said, quote, "Tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie." End quote. So with that, we have read another book. Book 8, Thermopylae, was moving and gripping to the very end with several different storylines being tied together. And I wanted to first focus on the storyline of Rooster, which in this book, actually, they call him by his actual name, Dekton, which I think says something about him. So first, what do you all think it says about Rooster's character arc? That in the end, he is a Spartan officer who leads 2 battalions of armed helots to a victory over the Persians. And for context, if you haven't read the book or listened to previous episodes, Rooster throughout the book denied the offer to become a Spartan citizen and was banished to fight in the Persian army because he hated the Spartans so much. And in episode 7, we learned he had a change of heart, helped attempt to assassinate Xerxes, and Leonidas granted him Spartan citizenship and his freedom. So he has completely done a 180. So what do you all think about how the story ended with Rooster's character development?
I think Rooster, kind of on a lighter note, Rooster's like the guy who plays for your team, whatever team you're supporting. And he starts talking bad about your team because they're not giving him the contract he wants or something like that. So then he ends up on a different team. And he doesn't do as well on the other team. And he starts complaining about the other team. And then he eventually comes back to your team. And he kind of is like, oh, like I feel like I missed out on, I didn't understand really the privilege I had. The example I think of with this is like if Tyreek Hill were to come back to the Chiefs. Right now, Tyreek Hill with the Dolphins, it's like he clearly doesn't actually think Tua's a better quarterback than Patrick Mahomes, but he's got to say that right now. And so I think that's the example I think of, which is obviously way lighter, but it is a not very common plotline for people in general to have this big of a like redemption, turnover, and that kind of thing. I think it's cool to see. I think, again, we know with what the Persians thought versus what the Greeks thought. And, he was so excited to go to the Persians because he was looking forward to like essentially killing Greeks. But then you see like, he's like, oh, freedom's actually pretty cool. And being like under a slave or a warlord is not ideal.
So we can all agree Rooster was the hunchback in the movie 300. Right?
Except that apparently he was a specimen of a man. So not quite the hunchback.
That sounds right.
He kind of did all the same things.
The hunchback doesn't ever actually come back.
Oh, okay.
Minus the hunchback.
But he always wanted to be a Spartan in a sense, and then he went to the other side.
Yeah.
I just wonder how they came up with that character from a story like this.
Yeah.
Zack Snyder. I love a book with a good character arc, character development, whether that's going from a really good person to an evil person or vice versa. And I think Steven Pressfield does a great job with character development in this book. If you're on Goodreads or read reviews on any book, really, one of the categories that people often talk about is character development. And seeing Rooster's arc end up this way was just such a triumphant moment. Really cool to see that he came from being this bitter, spoiled little brat of a man who became a traitor. And then out of simply the grace of Leonidas, he got his citizenship. And then we see him fighting against the Persians. It was just very cool to see. Very inspiring. And also probably somewhat relatable. Not all of us are the Dianikis of the world where we're just living the most honorable life all the time. A lot of us have our faults, but there's always room for redemption.
It's good. Flez, you got any thoughts?
I think his transformation just shows how loyalty and honor and respect can reshape someone's life purpose. Now, how he's initially so critical of the way the Spartans are, and then eventually he embodies those values. I think it's just kind of cool how he changes so much.
What about you, Thomas?
There's a lot of roosters in Hawaii, right?
Ton of roosters, man. They don't have much character development, though, unfortunately. They kind of do the same stuff all the time. Just peck around and run in front of cars and stuff.
Cock-a-doodle-doo.
Classic.
All right. This story showcases how the commitment to a cause by a small number of people can overpower a large number of fractured groups of people. The Battle of Thermopylae was likely the figurative straw that broke the Persians' camel's back. So what can we learn about this and apply to our own lives today to build a consistent lifestyle committed around specific beliefs and values to ensure we ourselves don't crack and dissolve when pressure inevitably comes?
I think of faith, obviously. Our foundation is our faith. That's kind of the ultimate cause that we're all fighting for. And so like when pressure comes in our lives, do we just crack or do we turn to God? Do we turn to Jesus? That's just what I think of right off the bat. I'm sure that we can all relate to that.
For sure. I think just really simply the idea that when you stand firm for your values, you're not just doing it for yourself. That other people see it and it can inspire, it can change them.
I think we saw this in the previous books where discipline and habit come into play. One of my favorite quotes from the Hobbit movie is Gandalf says, "I've found it is the small things, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay."
Mm.
So little disciplines, little things that you do every day builds habits. And so whenever hard times come, you have that habit formed from doing these little discipline things every single day. And yeah, when the pressure comes, when the stress comes, you're already mentally prepared because of the habits that you've been doing.
That's good, man.
This question reminds me of the quote, "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." And I do feel like in today's day and age, when everybody has an opinion and everybody has a point of view and they're kind of just spraying it around everywhere else, it is hard to stay on track. And you have the word fractured, and you're talking about fractured in terms of groups of people in this case. But I think, at least personally, my attention gets fractured easily in terms of what I choose to focus on most, or what I choose to pursue as like my main goal in life. And it is hard to stay committed to a particular cause over a long period of time, which is really what gets you the furthest. And especially if you're in a group and you guys are all kind of doing the same thing. So I think that's key.
Right on. Which character do you most identify with? And perhaps another way to answer it, or part two of the question, which character do you want to most identify with? And I'll start it off. I would say I most identify with Alexandros. I think he is kind of the odd duck of the 300. It kind of chronicles how he's like part of the group, but he's just like a little bit different. And I've shared with you guys sometimes I can feel like that, where it's like, yeah, man, I can play sports. I can fit in most ways. But then there's a lot of ways where I can kind of feel like a fish out of water, or just different, right? And Alexandros' example, he was always a truth teller, never went along with like the sarcasm line. He was just like, no, I'm going to tell the truth. I hate death. It scared me. And he liked art and stuff. I'm not super artsy, so I'm not saying I align with all of his personality types, but more of just like that. Like I was the guy in the football locker room that was just kind of felt like the odd man out or whatever. And so I identified with a lot with that. And I really enjoyed how he pushed through some of his barriers of like, man, war, that was tough to see, but this is what I'm called to do. So I'm still going to do it. I thought that was really cool. So I really liked Alexandros.
All right, Garrett, your other question though, which character do you want to most identify with?
Yeah, I feel like that one's probably going to be a little bit more unanimous. People are going to say Leonidas or Dianakes or something like that, but answer however you want.
Yeah.
This is the mic is yours.
I am Leonidas, actually. Reincarnated.
The Gerard Butler version, though, not the old man version. I think for me, probably Xiones. I think that Xiones spends a lot of time thinking about what he wants to become and doesn't necessarily do that. I think that he has these goals and aspirations, and I think that sometimes kind of gets in the way of actually being those things and doing those things. He seems to be a little bit of a follower. I still think that he has like some, noble and good values, but I think that compared to the other individuals, I don't think that he stands as strong with things. And then I think for me, probably Dianakes is like the one who I would say like I'd aspire or like want to be like. And really it has probably most to do with, and I think I talked about it a couple weeks ago, I think he truly represents in this telling of the story like a whole man, like a well-rounded man, masculinity in strength, intelligence, wisdom, but also like emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, Dianakes, from like a mentorship perspective, his wisdom and how he just kind of had good perspective on situations and how he cared so much for Alexandros as his mentor, as well as his girls, as a father, as a husband, how he was willing to take the fall to spare Rooster's baby, things like that. There were a lot of things that it's like, yeah, I want that to be true of my life. I want to be known as someone who mentors and raises up other men, not directly related to me, but then also really cares about my family and is willing to perhaps have some stains on my public reputation if it means living with integrity and doing the right thing deep down.
I'd say I relate most to Aridi. Just kidding.
Man, I thought you were about to say something serious, Fles.
I would probably say Xerxes because he's badass and he's the king of everything.
Because he's a god.
What about the wake up to these? Anyone relate to that guy?
I think that was my character for Thomas. I think Thomas could be that guy. He's the vendor that goes around the Spartan camp and just is making everyone laugh. And he has that sign on his caravan or whatever that's like, the best prices for you, my foreskin. He's trying to say my friend.
I like it.
He says, wake up to these.
I thought you were going to say the guy they called Tripod. Because no one could take him down. That's why.
Anyone else laugh at the name Elephantinos?
Yes, I thought that was funny too.
No, but seriously, I think I relate mostly to Ziones just because of his dedication and loyalty. I think I'm a very loyal person and feel like he's very relatable. So it's easy to relate to that character the most. You know, he's just very loyal and dedicated to preserving like those around him. He's just a really cool character. But I really want to strive to be like Polynices.
Yeah?
Hey, he's the fastest of all of them. The strongest.
Yeah, I just want to be super arrogant and then, you know, finally break down and cry.
He's totally a bro. A lot of people would think you're cool.
Are you being serious though? It's okay if you are.
I'm serious about Ziones. I'm not serious about Polynices.
Okay. I mean, he was a really, an awesome character. And again, at the end, I thought it was really cool. Some of the things he did. I don't view him poorly.
Yeah, I don't either. That's the book that I discussed. I led was Polynices.
Yeah.
So I thought it was cool. But I mean, I have to go with Leonidas. It's just his wisdom, obviously. The book version, not the movie version.
His servant leadership for sure.
Yeah.
So for the record, both Adams, you don't identify with Ziones because you had very hardcore crushes on any of your cousins as a teenager.
I mean, we all had, you know.
Did we?
Wanted to give you guys the opportunity to clear the air.
We did both grow up in Fenton, so you never know, I guess.
Male cousins, female cousins. What are we talking here? I can't say who I feel like I'm most like, but I would say I thought Bruxius was an awesome character.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm drawing a blank. Who was that again?
He was the slave.
The very beginning, like the mentor.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
the uncle.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty amazing that as a slave, everybody gave him the most respect. Shows how humble he was, despite the fact that he was more skilled in a lot of ways than the folks that kind of ruled over him. They still respected him a ton, and he took those kids under his wing, you know, regardless of the circumstances, as if they were his own. And I thought that was pretty cool. But if I had read more of the book, I would have a better answer.
I think it's a great call, though. I forgot about him. And yeah, what he did, like he saved those Ziones and Diomedes' life. So that's awesome.
I've been going back and forth, but I probably had to land with Ziones. It was going to be Alexandros, but thinking about Ziones and his faith, how devoted he is to his faith and his love for archery. I'm a sucker for a bow and arrow. But he's just so loyal and devoted to the things that he cares about. And I admire that. He's always trying to get better at what he does. He's athletically gifted and talented and also a badass. He goes on that night raid, try to kill Xerxes. And yeah, he's just a really cool character. If I had to choose one I want to be like, there are two characters that were barely mentioned. They were like the brothers Alpheus and Maron, I think is their names. They were like up there with Polynices as these Olympic level athletes, incredible warriors, and they got to fight alongside King Leonidas. So I don't want to be in a actual leadership position. I'd rather have the honor of fighting for King Leonidas.
That's why I wanted to ask that question, because I felt like each of us might give different answers, because there's so many characters with so many different legit character development. Love it. Love the diversity of answers. 3 Ziones, an Alexandros and a Bruxius, and then Aspire we had Dianakes, Leonidas, Alpheus. I love it. I love that there's multiple characters to pull from. Just to wrap this up, any final thoughts on the book? Maybe share what your favorite part of the book was, or anything just to kind of summarize or recap the book and bring it to a conclusion.
Yeah, I just thought this was such a really, really good book. I think my favorite overall part of the book was just the overall imagery. You could just really get into the scenes of the book so easily, and they're very vivid and descriptive. And like the scene where Alexandros gets his hand chopped off, it's like you can literally, like, he puts you in that scene. You can see it happen. It's like almost in slow motion, that scene. That's how it was for me, at least. I would go with the imagery.
I really like the realism, which I've mentioned before, but how the author just makes it seem so real and physical. You really get to understand how exhausting fighting in a war is and all the preparation that goes into it. And I think one of my favorite parts is when Leonidas shows his servant leadership by just starting to build that wall. Just picks up a stone and starts stacking them in the midst of everyone else quarreling and arguing. He shows his leadership just by doing.
There's so many to choose from. One that stands out was Dianakes' handling of the 3 people that tried to flee from the Spartan camp to their own safety, in the reverse psychology that he put not just on them, but on the entire army, of calling out what was going on in everyone's hearts and how everyone doesn't want to be there. They'd rather be safe and sound, but then also letting them desert the camp and then letting anyone else desert the camp. And I think I can be a fairly controlling person where I'm like, I know what's best. If things just happen this way, whether it's parenting or at work or anything like that, I can just kind of be like, this is how it should be. So I'm going to try to puppeteer these people to do what I want because I know what's best. And Dianakes basically gave up all control. And he was just like, all right, anyone can leave. And by doing that, he gave people the freedom to choose. And the people that stayed, you knew they were the most loyal. They were there because they wanted to be. And they chose honor. Like, you just knew who was there, who had your side. And that just really spoke to me of like the paradoxical nature of that event, of by seemingly releasing control was actually the best thing that could have happened from that point on for the Greeks and being unified in the fight from that point on.
I was just impressed how in a book he was able to split up kind of the different times in which and I guess the narration of it in a way that was so easily to understand. Because I think sometimes when storylines hop from time period to time period, or you're in like kind of a space where the story's being told in present versus, as a story in the future, sometimes it's easy to get lost, but I didn't necessarily feel like that was the case with this book.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. I think one part that sticks out to me was, I think first to say, not typically the style of book that I read, definitely a challenging read for me. But one thing that stuck out to me was the exchange that Dianakes and Ziones had whenever she's like off living in like the convent of sorts. And really where she's talking, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, but where she's kind of talking about how there are these virtues, essentially. There's these things that are in the world, but they're not really of the world. And I think that it just fits well with the whole concept of the book of there's a lot of virtues that are discussed that are pretty high level virtues that we can't attain for a whole lifetime, but we can attain in moments or time periods. And I think too with that just the idea of like suffering with your like kind of current lot, I think I want to be content. And I think that contentment is very hard to deal with. People always want something different, want something better, but the idea of like being content with what I have and knowing that like your current situation is like shaping you into the person you're supposed to be.
It's great. Thanks for sharing, guys. All right, so with that wraps up season 6 of the Books Brothers podcast. Join us for season 7, where we will read Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage, written by Alfred Lansing. This is a book recommended to us by Thomas. Thomas, can you share why you recommended this book and what you're looking forward to reading together?
Yeah, I feel like we all really enjoyed reading River of Doubt, which was another historical story based on a true story, with a lot of details of what actually happened to some of these wild explorers back in the day. And I believe this is actually set in a pretty close to the time that the River of Doubt was also happening.
He referenced it in River of Doubt, actually. She referenced it.
Right. So I kind of got turned on to the idea of reading this book by Stalin, actually, because he said it was like one of the best stories that he had ever read in terms of like stories about explorers. And to kind of sum it up, I'll just kind of read the synopsis here. In August 1914, polar explorer Ernest Shackleton boarded the Endurance, became locked in an island of ice. Thus began the legendary ordeal of Shackleton and his crew of 27 men. When their ship was finally crushed between two ice floes, they attempted the near impossible journey over 850 miles of the South Atlantic's heaviest seas to the closest outpost of civilization, which just sounds absolutely brutal. So I feel like it should be a pretty intense book. And I also did a book report on Ernest Shackleton in 3rd grade. So I've got to learn more about this guy. He was a pretty cool guy, I think. So yeah, I'm excited for it.
Talk about full circle.
Bringing it back.
Hopefully everybody enjoys it.
Do you have that report? Could you read it to us to start off season 7? I'd love to hear a book report written by Thomas Sensman as a 10-year-old.
I might have it. My mom might have it at home.
That'd be
awesome.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to read it. Excited for another book. River of Doubt was incredible. So if this is anything like it, it's going to be a really fun read.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Books Brothers podcast. Join us next month as we read and discuss part 1 of Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. If you have enjoyed listening or benefited from our conversation, please subscribe, give us a review, and share with a friend that you want to connect with. Lastly, we would love to hear your thoughts. You can reach us by email at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com or on Instagram @booksbrotherspodcast. Until next time, read, reflect, and connect.